I was halfway through painting the living room wall when it hit me. I hadn't seen Emma in nearly 48 hours. I mean, technically, I had seen her. She came home, we exchanged the usual pleasantries, but I realized I couldn't pinpoint a single moment where we actually spoke, like really spoke. I'd been busy with the kids, fixing up the house, and she was doing her thing. We passed each other like ghosts, maybe shared a meal if the timing worked out, but that was it. 2 days. 2 whole days, and nothing felt off until now. I put the brush down and looked around. The house was too quiet. Ava and Liam were at their friend's place for the weekend, and the silence was creeping in. The quiet has a way of amplifying things, making you notice stuff you'd usually ignore. That's when I heard it. The faintest sound, like a laugh, coming from the backyard. Emma's laugh. It wasn't a full belly laugh. It was the kind of laugh she used to reserve for when we were first dating, back when she'd playfully punch me on the arm and say, "Stop making me laugh, I'm serious." It was light, intimate. The kind of laugh that belonged to a private moment. But I was inside. Alone. I walked toward the sliding door, the one that led to our patio and the large oak tree she loved to sit under. There she was, sitting on the bench, legs crossed, hair blowing softly in the breeze. But she wasn't alone. There was a man. He was standing way too close. Closer than anyone but me should be. His back was to me, and he had one arm propped on the bench's backrest, leaning into her space, his head tilted as if he was telling her something only meant for her ears. I froze. For a moment, I told myself that this wasn't what it looked like. That I was jumping to conclusions. But then Emma's hand reached out, slow, deliberate, and rested on his knee. It lingered there, like it belonged. And that was when my brain short-circuited. I just stood there, staring, not able to comprehend what the hell was happening. This was my house, my wife, and here she was, in the middle of what looked like some cozy, private moment with a guy I had never seen before. I didn't even realize I was gripping the sliding door handle until it started to creak under the pressure. My heart was racing, my breath coming out in short bursts. But I didn't make a sound. I just watched. Finally, she said something too low for me to catch, but I saw the guy laugh, the same easy, intimate kind of laugh she used to share with me. They were in their own little world, and I was the intruder. After what felt like hours but was probably only a minute or two, the guy stood up. He glanced around quickly, probably to make sure no one was watching, and then did something that made my blood run cold. He leaned down and kissed her on the forehead. It wasn't a passionate kiss. It wasn't the kind of kiss you'd catch in a movie. It was worse. It was soft, familiar, like something they'd done 100 times before. Emma didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled at him, like this was the most natural thing in the world. I felt a wave of nausea hit me so hard I thought I might actually throw up. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Do I go out there and confront them? Do I play it cool and wait for more proof? Do I scream? Punch the guy? Or do I walk away, pretend I didn't just see what I saw? Before I could decide, the guy turned and started walking toward the side gate. Emma watched him leave, and when he was out of sight, she just sat there, staring off into the distance, like nothing had happened. Like I wasn't watching. And for a split second, I wished I wasn't. But now I knew. My wife was having an affair, right under my nose, and it wasn't even hidden. She didn't care enough to hide it anymore. That kiss. It wasn't the start of something. It was the end. They were comfortable, relaxed, like this was part of some routine. And I had just become an unwilling spectator. I felt my body tense, hands shaking as the realization set in. I wasn't about to let this slide. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in bed, staring at the ceiling, mind racing through every possible scenario of what to do next. But nothing made sense. How could it? How do you prepare for your whole world falling apart in front of you? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that guy's face, blurred, but clear enough to burn into my memory. He didn't belong in my home, with my wife, sharing moments under that oak tree. It was mine. She was mine. At least, she was supposed to be. I was restless. My heart wouldn't settle, my mind was a mess, and the silence of the house only made things worse. Emma came in late, around midnight, pretending nothing was out of the ordinary. She slipped into bed without saying a word, her back to me, like she always did now. She didn't notice that I wasn't sleeping. Or maybe she did. And didn't care. I knew I needed to get answers. But I wasn't going to play the fool. If she thought I was going to sit around and let this continue, she was dead wrong. I just had to figure out how to approach it. How to make sure I knew the full extent of what was happening before I blew it all up. The next morning, I made my decision. I was going to follow her. Not some cheap detective trick, no private investigator nonsense, just me, paying attention to my wife, something I should have done a long time ago. There was no need for her to know I was onto her, not yet. I needed the truth, all of it. Not just the kiss I saw, not just the hints. I wanted to know how long this had been going on, how deep it ran. Was it a fling? Was she in love with this guy? Was it just about sex? I had no idea what I was about to find. Emma went about her usual routine that day, made the kids breakfast, kissed them on the forehead before they headed off to school. To anyone else, it looked like a normal morning. To me, it was like watching a stranger. She didn't act different, didn't seem nervous or guilty. It was just another day to her. But I knew what I saw. She kissed me on the cheek as she grabbed her bag, muttering something about meeting a client at noon. I nodded, pretending to be distracted by my phone, like I wasn't about to follow her and see where she was really going. My heart was hammering in my chest, my hands sweating as I waited for her to pull out of the driveway. When she was out of sight, I grabbed my keys and followed. I wasn't sure where she was going, but I had a sinking feeling. She had told me she had a busy day lined up, but I knew better now. The streets blurred together as I kept a safe distance behind her car, trying not to lose her in the traffic. My mind was racing, imagining all the ways this could go wrong. What if she caught me? What if I found something I wasn't ready for? What if I already knew the answer, and just didn't want to face it? After about 15 minutes, she pulled into a small parking lot behind a cafe. The place was tucked away, not the kind of spot we'd ever gone to together. There was something deliberate about her choice, like she didn't want to be seen by anyone who might know her. I parked a few cars back, staying low in my seat as I watched her step out of the car. She didn't head into the cafe right away. Instead, she stood by the entrance, looking around as if she were waiting for someone. And then he showed up. Same guy as yesterday. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The guy walked up to her casually, like this was just part of his day too. They didn't hug. They didn't kiss. They just started talking. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. Their body language was enough. They were comfortable. Too comfortable. I wanted to get out of the car, wanted to march right up to them and end this charade, but I held back. I needed more. I needed to know what they were doing, where they were going. Confronting her here, now, wasn't going to give me the full story. So, I waited. Watched. After about 10 minutes, they walked into the cafe together. I stayed in the car, heart pounding, trying to figure out my next move. Should I follow them inside? No, that was too risky. Instead, I waited, my eyes locked on the cafe entrance, waiting for them to come back out. 40 minutes later, they did. They were laughing. She was laughing at whatever dumb thing he said, the way she used to laugh at me. My stomach twisted. They didn't head back to the cars. Instead, they walked down the street, away from the cafe. I slipped out of my car and followed from a distance, careful not to be seen. They were too caught up in each other to notice anyone else. I watched as they turned the corner, heading toward a nearby hotel. My heart sank. This was it. I couldn't deny it anymore. They were heading into a hotel, and I knew damn well what that meant. My mouth was dry, my mind spinning as I watched them disappear into the building. I stood there for a few minutes, frozen, as if time had stopped. I wanted to storm in there, make a scene, drag her out and demand answers. But I didn't. I went back to my car and sat there for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the dashboard. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to know what was happening in that room. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending. After what must have been over an hour, I saw them leave the hotel. They weren't touching, but they didn't need to. They had the kind of look people have when they've already crossed every line. She didn't look guilty. She didn't even look worried. I followed them again, this time back to the cafe where they parted ways. She went back to her car like nothing had happened, probably headed to whatever client meeting she had scheduled. Maybe she'd grab the kids later and make dinner, and everything would be back to normal. But I knew better now. I headed home, my mind numb. I replayed everything I'd just seen, every moment of the past few months, looking for clues. I had never wanted to be wrong so badly in my life. I wanted there to be an explanation that made sense, one that didn't involve Emma sneaking off to a hotel with some guy. But there wasn't. I spent the rest of the afternoon pacing the house, waiting for her to come home. I wasn't sure what I'd do when she walked through that door. Would I confront her? Pretend like everything was fine? I didn't know. By the time she got home, I was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV but not really watching anything. She walked in, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how my day had been. Like nothing had changed. Like I hadn't just watched her walk out of a hotel with another man. Fine, I muttered, barely able to look at her. I was still trying to process it all, trying to figure out how to act normal when nothing about this was normal anymore. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but didn't care. She went about her evening routine, cooking dinner, chatting with the kids, laughing like everything was fine. But for me, everything had changed. I knew I couldn't keep quiet for long. I had to confront her. But not yet. Not tonight. I needed time to think, to plan. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. No, not a chance. That night, I didn't sleep again. Emma was beside me, her breathing steady, calm, like she hadn't just walked out of a hotel with another man. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, waiting for morning. I couldn't take much more of this, of pretending, of swallowing down the anger that was threatening to consume me. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The next day, I woke up with a plan. I was going to confront her. No more waiting, no more guessing. I had enough to go on. She had no idea what I knew, no clue that I had followed her, that I'd seen her with that guy, that I knew she'd spent time in a hotel with him. And I was going to use that to my advantage. I'd get her to admit it. I'd make her come clean, then I'd decide what to do from there. She was in the kitchen making breakfast when I walked in. She gave me a quick smile, but there was nothing behind it. I wondered how long she'd been giving me that empty smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes. I couldn't remember the last time I saw her really look at me. "Morning," she said, her voice light, as if today was just another day. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed a cup of coffee and stood there, staring at her. She didn't notice the way I was looking at her, or if she did, she didn't let on. She was too busy acting like everything was fine, like she hadn't been lying to me for God knows how long. I sat down at the table, still watching her, waiting for the right moment. She sat across from me, chatting about the kids, asking if I had any plans for the weekend. It was so casual, so normal, that it made my blood boil. I couldn't take it anymore. I put down my coffee. "Who was that guy you were with yesterday?" The words came out sharper than I intended, and the moment I said them, I saw the change in her. It was subtle, but it was there. She froze for a split second before recovering, trying to keep her face neutral. But it was too late. I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. "What?" she asked, her voice steady, too steady. "Yesterday," I repeated, leaning forward, my eyes locked on hers. "I saw you. At the cafe. And at the hotel." Her face went pale. I watched as she tried to process what I just said, tried to come up with an explanation, but there was none. She was caught, and she knew it. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just sat there, staring at me, her mouth slightly open like she was about to speak but couldn't find the words. Finally, she broke the silence. "It's not what you think." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that even surprised me. "Not what I think?" "Really, Emma?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think. You, sneaking off to a hotel with some guy I've never seen before. So why don't you enlighten me, huh? Tell me what I'm missing here." Her eyes darted around the room, like she was looking for an escape, but there was none. Not this time. She was trapped, and she knew it. "He's just a friend," she said, her voice shaking now. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "Don't lie to me." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. She wasn't expecting that. I'd never raised my voice at her before, never lost my temper like this. But I wasn't going to let her lie to me, not anymore. "I'm not lying," she whispered, but the words rang hollow, even to her. "Friends don't meet in hotels, Emma," I said, my voice lower now, but no less angry. "Friends don't hide things. Friends don't lie." She flinched at that, but still didn't say anything. I watched as she struggled to find something, anything to say that would make this better, but there was nothing. The truth was out, and there was no covering it up now. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice cold. She didn't answer. "How long, Emma?" Still nothing. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I couldn't sit still anymore. My heart was racing, and the anger I'd been trying to keep in check was bubbling to the surface. "Tell me the truth. Right now." Finally, she broke. "A few months." "A few months?" I repeated, my voice incredulous. "And you didn't think to tell me? You didn't think I deserved to know?" She looked down at her hands, wringing them together like she didn't know what to do with them. "I didn't want to hurt you." I laughed again, the bitterness filling every word. "You didn't want to hurt me? That's rich, Emma. Really? You think sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, going off with some guy, you think that's better than just telling me the truth?" She started to cry then, quiet, soft tears that only made me angrier. I wasn't going to let her cry her way out of this. Not this time. "Who is he?" I demanded. She shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "It doesn't matter." "Of course, it fucking matters." I snapped. "Tell me who he is." "Just someone from work," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Someone from work. Someone she saw every day. Someone who had been around, right in front of me, and I never saw it. I never even suspected it. "How long?" I asked again, my voice quieter this time. "How long have you been sleeping with him?" She didn't answer right away, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't some mistake. This had been going on for a while. 6 months, she finally whispered. 6 months. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I sat back down, my head spinning. 6 months. Half a year. She had been lying to me for half a year. I couldn't even comprehend it. I didn't speak for a long time, and neither did she. The silence was suffocating, but I didn't know what else to say. What else was there? She had admitted it. She had been cheating on me for 6 months, and there was no going back from that. "I never meant for it to happen," she said, breaking the silence. It just what?" I interrupted, my voice hard. "It just happened? You just accidentally fell into bed with him? Is that what you're going to tell me?" She winced at my words, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel that sting, to feel some of the pain she had put me through. "I didn't plan it," she said quietly. "It just got out of control." "Out of control," I repeated, shaking my head. "And what now?" Are you planning to leave me? Is that the plan? She shook her head quickly. No. No, I don't want to leave you. Then what the hell do you want? I demanded, standing up again. Because you sure as hell don't act like someone who wants to stay married. I don't know, she whispered, her voice broken. And that was it. She didn't know. She had torn our marriage apart, and she didn't even know what she wanted. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away, to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I don't remember how long I drove that day. I didn't have a destination, just a need to get as far away from Emma as I could. Every corner I turned, every road I sped down, felt like I was trying to outrun the reality of what had just happened. I felt trapped in my own head, replaying our confrontation over and over until I thought I might lose it. But eventually, I had to stop. I pulled over into some parking lot on the outskirts of town, engine still running, hands gripping the steering wheel. I was numb. Hollow. Like the life I thought I had was already dead and gone. The person I had shared my life with, built a family with, had ripped it all away without hesitation. 6 months of lies, 6 months of betrayal. It was all a lie. And I was the fool who didn't see it. I wasn't going to be the fool any longer. Sitting there, staring at the empty street, something inside me shifted. I realized that just confronting her wasn't enough. I wasn't going to let her just cry and beg her way out of this. I wasn't going to let her get away with tearing apart everything we'd built together and then expect me to pick up the pieces. No. She was going to pay for what she did. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this without consequences. I sat there for a long time, thinking. Planning. If she thought this was going to end with some tearful apology and empty promises, she was wrong. I was done playing the part of the clueless husband. I was going to make sure she felt the full weight of her decisions. But I wasn't going to blow up in anger. No. That was what she probably expected, some emotional outburst, maybe a fight. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I was going to take control of this situation in a way she wouldn't see coming. By the time I started the car again, I had a plan. And it was going to hurt her exactly where it mattered. The first thing I did when I got back home was act like nothing had happened. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her face still red and puffy from crying, but she didn't say anything when I walked in. She looked like she wanted to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. I walked past her, up to our bedroom, and locked the door behind me. The next few days went by quietly, but there was tension. She knew something was coming, but she didn't know what. I didn't ask her any questions. I didn't tell her I was thinking about divorce. I didn't say a word about that guy, or the hotel, or any of it. Instead, I started preparing. The first thing I did was gather everything I needed. I began with our finances. I had always been in charge of paying the bills, managing the accounts, making sure the mortgage was paid on time. Emma never really paid much attention to the details, trusting me to handle it. That was her first mistake. I spent hours going over every financial record we had, bank accounts, savings, investments, everything. I moved quickly, methodically, making sure I had control over every dollar we owned. I shifted money around, putting more of it into accounts under my name only. It wasn't hard, I'd always been the one in charge of the money. Emma wouldn't even notice. Then, I called my lawyer. I didn't tell her I was planning on filing for divorce just yet, but I wanted to make sure I knew exactly what I was entitled to. I wanted to know what moves I could make that would ensure I came out of this on top. If Emma thought she was going to walk away from this with a clean break and half of everything we owned, she had another thing coming. Once I had the financial part under control, I moved on to the house. It was in both of our names, but I had plans to make sure it stayed mine. I called a realtor, asking for an estimate on the property's value. I made sure I had all the information ready to present in court if things went that far. While all of this was going on, Emma tried to talk to me a few times. She'd come into the room, asking if we could sit down and have a real conversation, but I brushed her off. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses anymore. She had already said enough. Every time she opened her mouth, it felt like she was stabbing me all over again. I could tell she was starting to panic. I could see it in the way she tiptoed around the house, in how quiet she became when we were in the same room. I knew she felt guilty, but it wasn't enough. She deserved more than just guilt. She deserved to feel the same kind of pain she had caused me. That's when I got the idea for the final part of my plan. I knew Emma loved her job. She had worked her way up over the years, becoming one of the top PR executives at her firm. She was proud of it, too. It was part of her identity. But what I also knew, thanks to some light digging through her emails and phone, was that her little affair wasn't as secret as she thought. I found messages. Emails between her and that guy. They weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. They were enough to prove that something had been going on for a while, and they were sent using her work email. I smiled when I saw them. Emma had been sloppy. I printed out copies of everything. All the messages, the emails, the calendar invites to those work meetings that were actually dates. I gathered it all, making sure I had every piece of evidence I needed. Then, I sent them to her boss. It was easy enough to get the contact information. I crafted a simple, anonymous email with all the attachments, explaining what had been going on. I didn't need to say much. The proof was all there. Emma's reputation at work was about to take a hit, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. The morning everything came crashing down was one of the best days of my life. Emma had no idea what was coming. She was dressed for work, grabbing her coffee, acting like everything was fine. I watched her leave the house with that same empty smile on her face, and for a moment, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. I knew it wouldn't be long before she got the call. It was only a matter of time before her boss found out, before the company realized that one of their top executives had been using company resources for her little affair. I waited for the fallout. It didn't take long. That afternoon, I got a text from Emma, asking if I could meet her at home. She didn't say why, but I already knew. When I walked into the house, she was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, her hands trembling. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "David," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What did you do?" I smiled, leaning against the counter. "I just made sure everyone knew the truth, Emma." She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. "You ruined me." "No, you ruined yourself," I said, my voice cold. "I just made sure the world knew about it." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. She had brought this on herself. She had lied, cheated, and destroyed our marriage, and now she was facing the consequences. "You think you can just screw around behind my back and walk away clean?" I asked, my voice low but firm. "Did you really think I'd let you get away with it?" She didn't answer, just kept crying, her shoulders shaking with every sob. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I had made my point, and now she knew. There was no coming back from this. She had lost her job, her reputation, and soon, she'd lose me. I turned and left her sitting there, drowning in her own guilt. It wasn't enough to undo the damage she had done, but it was a start. The days after Emma lost her job felt surreal. She was there, but it was like living with a shell of the person she used to be. Every time I saw her sitting at the kitchen table, head in her hands, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. I wasn't proud of what I did, or maybe I was. I wasn't sure anymore. What I knew was that she deserved it. All of it. She had taken our life and set it on fire, and I had made sure the flames consumed her too. Now, she was jobless, her reputation in tatters, and that guy? He wasn't sticking around either. I heard her on the phone with him the night everything blew up. They fought. He said something about how this was never meant to get messy, how he didn't want to be involved in drama. The moment she got caught, he was out. Good riddance. But even with all that, something inside me still wasn't settled. Sure, I had done what I set out to do. I had taken back control, humiliated her, and made her pay for what she did. But it didn't feel like enough. The house was quiet, too quiet, and I realized that even after all the revenge, I was left with the mess. Our marriage was in pieces, and there was no putting it back together. The time had come to end it. Officially. I waited a few days after the fallout before I approached her again. I needed to be calm, clear-headed. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about closure, about making sure she knew that I was done, that there was no coming back from this. Not now, not ever. She was in the living room when I found her, sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She didn't hear me walk in, and for a moment, I just stood there, watching her. She looked tired. Broken. But I didn't feel any sympathy. She had done this to herself. I walked in front of the TV and turned it off. She blinked, looking up at me, her eyes dull, lifeless. "We need to talk," I said. She didn't respond right away, just stared at me like she didn't understand what I was saying. Finally, she nodded, shifting on the couch to face me. I sat down in the chair across from her, keeping a distance between us. I wasn't interested in getting close anymore. "This isn't working," I said, cutting straight to the point. "You know that, right?" She swallowed, her eyes darting to the floor. "I know. We can't keep doing this," I continued. "I can't. Whatever we're doing here, it's over." She nodded again, tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't speak. I could see the guilt on her face, the shame, but none of it mattered to me. She had already done the damage. "I've been thinking," I said, leaning forward slightly, "about what happens next." She wiped at her eyes, sniffling quietly. "David." "No," I interrupted. "I don't want to hear it. I don't want your apology. I don't want excuses. I just want to know what you're planning to do about this marriage." She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you want to try to save it? Do you think there's something left here worth saving?" The words came out colder than I intended, but I didn't care. Emma hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I don't know what to do." I scoffed. "You don't know what to do? After everything? After 6 months of lying and cheating, now you don't know what to do?" "I didn't want this," she said, her voice cracking. "I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't want to hurt me? You cheated on me for 6 months, Emma. You destroyed our marriage, and you're telling me you didn't want to hurt me?" She looked away, tears streaming down her face now. "I didn't mean for it to happen." I shook my head, disgusted. "You didn't mean for it to happen. You didn't accidentally cheat, Emma. You made choices. You chose to lie. You chose to betray me." She wiped her eyes again, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. I wasn't interested in her tears. "I don't know why I did it," she whispered. "I was just lost." "Lost," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "You weren't lost, Emma. You were selfish." Her shoulders shook as she cried, and for a moment, I thought about leaving it at that. But no. I needed to know. I needed to hear her say it. "Do you love him?" I asked, my voice low. Her sobbing quieted for a moment. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "No." I didn't believe her. "Then why?" She shook her head. "I don't know. It just happened." "That's not good enough," I said, standing up. I couldn't sit still anymore. The anger was bubbling up again, threatening to spill over. "You don't just throw away 10 years of marriage because you're lost. That's not how it works." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sorry doesn't fix this," I snapped, pacing the room now. "Sorry doesn't change what you did." She didn't say anything, just sat there, broken. And for the first time, I realized that she really didn't have any answers. She didn't know why she did it. She didn't know how to fix it. And she didn't know what to do next. But I did. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, stopping in front of her. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" "You heard me," I said firmly. "I'm done, Emma. This marriage is over." She stood up, her hands shaking as she reached for me. "David, please. Don't do this. We can fix it. We can go to counseling, we can." "No," I said, stepping back, away from her touch. "I don't want to fix it. I don't want to fix you. You made your choice, Emma. And now I'm making mine." She broke down again, sobbing uncontrollably, but I didn't move. I just stood there, watching her fall apart. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where she finally realized what she had done. And it didn't feel good. It didn't feel like victory. It just felt empty. "I love you," she cried, her voice desperate. "I love you, David. Please, don't leave me." I shook my head, my jaw clenched tight. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." "I was stupid," she said, her words coming out in a rush. "I made a mistake, A mistake is spilling a glass of water," I interrupted. "What you did? That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Every time you met him, every time you lied to me, that was a choice. And now you have to live with it." She sank to the floor, her sobs filling the room, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I walked past her, heading for the door. I didn't need to say anything else. I had said everything I needed to say, and there was nothing left. "I'll have the papers ready by the end of the week," I said quietly as I reached the door. She didn't respond. She just sat there, broken, the weight of her actions finally crushing her. I left the house without looking back. After I left the house that day, I didn't go far. I drove aimlessly around town, trying to process everything. It was strange. For so long, I had been fueled by this burning need for revenge, to make her pay for what she had done. And now, after I told her it was over, after watching her break down, there was no satisfaction. No relief. Just a quiet, hollow feeling in my chest. I knew I wasn't going back to that house, not that day, maybe not ever. So I drove to a hotel on the edge of town, booked a room, and sat there staring at the wall. It was strange, being alone. For years, that house had been my life. Emma, the kids, the routine, it was all I knew. And now I had to face the fact that it was all gone. But I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just empty. The next day, I went to see the lawyer. The same one I had consulted when I first found out about her affair. He wasn't surprised to see me. In fact, he already had the papers drafted. All it took was a few signatures, and it was done. I had made sure everything was in order, our assets, the house, the accounts. I wasn't going to let her walk away with half of everything we built, not after what she had done. Sitting across from the lawyer, signing those papers, felt surreal. I never thought I'd be here, never thought I'd be the guy getting divorced after 10 years of marriage. But here I was, pen in hand, watching my life unravel on paper. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. I felt more like an observer in someone else's story, like this wasn't really happening to me. "Are you sure you want to move forward with this?" the lawyer asked, looking at me over the top of his glasses. I nodded. "I'm sure." He didn't ask any more questions. He just handed me the final document, and that was it. I was officially starting the process of ending my marriage. I walked out of the lawyer's office and sat in my car for a long time, staring at the divorce papers in my hand. I knew I should feel something: relief, anger, sadness, but there was nothing. It was like the part of me that cared had shut down completely. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was just the exhaustion of the past few weeks catching up to me. Either way, I knew there was no going back now. I didn't go home that night, either. I stayed at the hotel, watching mindless TV, eating room service meals that tasted like cardboard. I avoided talking to anyone, especially the kids. They were still with Emma, and I wasn't ready to explain anything to them yet. Not until I had my head straight. But the next day, I couldn't put it off any longer. I had to face the reality of what was happening. I had to talk to the kids. When I walked into the house, it was quiet. Too quiet. Emma wasn't there. She must have gone out, probably to give me space, though I wasn't sure if she was trying to avoid me or if she was genuinely giving me time. Either way, I was grateful. Liam and Ava were in the living room, watching TV. When they saw me walk in, they jumped up, excited, like nothing had changed. Like they hadn't noticed the tension in the house, the way Emma and I had been avoiding each other for weeks. I tried to smile, but it felt forced. "Hey, guys," I said, sitting down on the couch. They piled onto the couch next to me, talking about school, their friends, all the usual stuff. I let them talk, let them fill the room with their voices, because I knew what I had to say was going to change everything. Eventually, Liam noticed that I wasn't saying much. He looked up at me, frowning. "Dad, are you okay?" I nodded, even though I wasn't. "We need to talk," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. They both went quiet, looking at me with wide eyes. I wasn't sure how to start, how to explain something like this to kids who didn't deserve any of it. But I knew I couldn't keep stalling. "Your mom and I, we're getting a divorce," I said, the words feeling heavy as they left my mouth. Ava blinked, like she didn't understand. "What?" Liam just stared at me, his face unreadable. He was always more perceptive, always able to pick up on things without anyone having to explain them. And I could see in his eyes that he already knew, even if he hadn't wanted to believe it. I sighed, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I'm sorry, guys. I know this is hard, and I wish it wasn't happening. But it is. Your mom and I, we've been having problems for a while now, and we've decided that it's best if we go our separate ways." Ava started crying immediately, burying her face in my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her, trying to comfort her, but I knew there was nothing I could say to make it better. Divorce wasn't something you could sugarcoat. It was ugly, painful, and no amount of comforting words was going to change that. Liam, on the other hand, didn't cry. He just sat there, staring at the floor, his jaw clenched tight. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but he wasn't going to let it show. He was trying to be strong, trying to hold it together for his sister, but I knew this was hitting him hard. He was old enough to understand what divorce meant. Old enough to know that everything was about to change. "Is it our fault?" Ava asked between sobs. "No," I said firmly. "This is not your fault. It has nothing to do with you or your brother. This is between your mom and me, and we both love you very much. That's never going to change." She didn't say anything else, just cried quietly against my chest. I looked over at Liam, who still hadn't moved, still hadn't said a word. "You okay, buddy?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with anger. "Why?" he asked, his voice low. "Why are you doing this?" I swallowed hard. I couldn't tell him the truth, not the whole truth. He didn't need to know about the affair, about everything his mom had done. Not yet. Sometimes people just grow apart," I said carefully. "And when that happens, it's better for everyone if they move on. Your mom and I, we're not happy together anymore. But that doesn't mean we don't love you." Liam stared at me for a long moment, like he was searching my face for something, maybe a sign that this was all a bad dream, that I wasn't serious. But when he didn't find it, he stood up abruptly. "I'm going to my room," he said, his voice cold. I watched him walk away, feeling helpless. I knew this was going to be hard on him. Hard on both of them. But there was nothing I could do to fix it. The damage was already done. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings with the lawyer, and long, tense conversations with Emma about custody and dividing assets. We tried to keep things civil, especially for the kids, but it was impossible to erase the bitterness between us. she didn't fight me on the divorce. She didn't even try to argue for the house or for more money. I think she knew that she didn't have a leg to stand on, not after everything that happened. We agreed on shared custody. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best option for the kids. I didn't want to tear them away from their mom, no matter how much I despised her. She was still their mother, and they deserved to have both parents in their lives, even if we couldn't be a family anymore. The day we signed the final divorce papers was quiet. There were no arguments, no tears. Just signatures on a page, the end of a marriage that had once meant everything to me. I didn't feel anything as I walked out of the courthouse. No relief, no sadness. Just the same numbness that had settled in weeks ago. Life after the divorce was strange at first. The house felt too big, too empty without the kids running around, without Emma's presence lingering in the corners. But I adjusted. Slowly, but surely, I found a new routine. I spent more time with Liam and Ava when they were with me, trying to be the best dad I could, even if I wasn't sure what that looked like anymore. One night, after I had put the kids to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the empty space where the family pictures used to hang. I had taken them down the day Emma moved out. It felt wrong to leave them up, like clinging to something that was already gone. But now, sitting there in the silence, I realized that even though the pictures were gone, the memories weren't. The good times, the bad, they were all still there, part of me. I wasn't the same man I had been when this all started. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. But maybe that was okay. Maybe this was just the beginning of something new, something different. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could face it without the weight of the past dragging me down.